So, hey everyone, welcome to The Race. Today we've got the pleasure of talking to Axel Sukianto. He's the founder of the Generate B2B marketing community. Axel's also a growth marketing consultant as well. So he's had an epic career journey so far. So he started out as an intern with Ernst & Young and then moved on to KPMG before delving into the world of marketing and B2B tech companies. He's worked with Cisco, Dropbox and UpGuard. Super experienced guy, super fun as well. So welcome Axel, great to have you here today.
Dude, so awesome to be here.
Let's just crack right into it, So I guess what I found quite interesting when I was doing a little bit of research into your background, you've got a double degree in law and commerce. So how have you ended up here doing what you're doing?
Good question. So yes, I started off my university degree with law and commerce at university, and I did that. I went into working in the law for 3 years, and then I decided that, hey, I didn't want to be a lawyer for the rest of my life. And I did a bit of soul searching around like what I wanted to do, and I sort of fell into marketing. But at the crux of it is I wanted to be on the side of the house that generates revenue, or at least be closer to revenue. And I had worked for a law firm that provided a lot of service and advice to our clients that wasn't necessarily revenue generating. So I'd made the switch and I fell into marketing, and I've been here for like over 10 years now.
Wow, nice. And over 10 years, probably done quite a few things. I know you've worked at a few different companies. What has been a couple of highlights that come to mind for you? Yeah,
totally. The highlights of my career is probably making the switch from being a lawyer into the marketing space. I get a lot of questions around how you made that switch. In all honesty, great timing for me and knowing the right people. I knew someone else who also made that switch from being a lawyer to working in marketing at Dropbox. And she said, hey, if you're looking for a switch, have to speak to my manager. And then we ended up working together at Dropbox, and now we remain really close friends. But what is been awesome over the past 10 years is like the different sizes of companies I've worked in. So I'm an exclusively B2B SaaS marketer. If you ask me to market Coca-Cola or any sort of B2C brand, I wouldn't know the first thing to do. But being in the space and being deep in a particular space has allowed me to see different spectrums of like what happens on a small company and what happens on an extremely large company in B2B SaaS. And being able to go deep has been a highlight. But the last thing is probably like being able to grow a company and set up a marketing machine. And I think that being able to go deep and then really understand how to set up the marketing machine and the revenue machine, that's really a highlight.
Yeah, no doubt. It's always awesome to sort of start from zero and work your way up from there. And saying that, you've also started your career working at really large B2B SaaS companies as well. What are 2 or 3 of those key differences that you find that you've experienced?
I think the different focuses for like a small company and a large company, as we can all probably imagine, the number of resources in a large company is just astounding, right? Like there are so many people in large companies and they're focusing on so many different things. One person could be focused on one specific thing, right? And like I remember trying to fix an email for a particular program at a large company, and then it turns out there was a particular owner who owns the banner of that email, and you had to change it. You had to get their buy-in and their boss's buy-in. Meanwhile, when you're working in startup land, like if you come up with an idea to your boss and it's good enough, and if your boss truly believes it, they're like, yeah, go for it. Own the campaign and own the project, make it better. And I think that autonomy in like a smaller company has allowed me to grow much faster than really just learning one small thing in a big company. And honestly, like creating that impact is kind of fun.
Yeah. And I think I haven't worked at a company of that size before, but I can definitely imagine how you end up like a smaller piece of the wider puzzle. And while you still have a really big impact, it's probably a bit harder to understand what your impact is all of the time as well. Whereas obviously in the smaller startup space, you get to see that almost straight away. Sometimes there's like clear inputs and outputs, and you get to experiment, which is something I know that you're really into as well. And I guess that's led you to starting the Generate community also, which is something I'm really keen to explore today. So do you want to give us a bit of an overview of the genesis of the Generate community?
Yeah. So the Generate community, it is a closed community of B2B marketers in Australia and New Zealand. So how the Generate community started is about maybe 2.5 years ago. The sort of like community movement in the US started to really prop up. And honestly speaking, I find that the US is slightly ahead of us in Australia and New Zealand. So I saw these marketing communities pop up and I joined a few, and I really accelerated my personal career as well as my learning, right? People asking questions in a safe space, people sharing their learnings and failures. And I really, really liked being a part of it. But when it came to a point where I needed some support locally, and what I mean by that is I'd ask questions such as, hey, I need support with a PPC agency in time zone. Does anyone have any recommendations? And people would give me recommendations of agencies based out of California or based out of Florida. And like, well, I don't really want to wake up at 2 a.m. to do a whip call with my agency. And a second thing happened, and I needed to find a swag agency to be able to turn things around 72 hours in Brisbane. So I was like, hey, does anyone know any swag agencies in Brisbane? Crickets, right? And it dawned upon me that I was like, okay, there's a bit of a gap here. Why don't we start something? So I knew a few people in the space. I didn't know a lot 2.5 years ago. So it was just initially me and another person. So it's just two of us. And I remember this specific moment where I said, hey, instead of messaging on WhatsApp, can we move our chat into this Slack community that we've set up for Generate? And we started off with the two of us. And now we have over 700 in-house B2B marketers in the Generate community.
Wow, that's huge growth in such a short time. And I know that you're super specific about who's in the community to make sure that with every additional person, there's a lot more value added as well. And so I know that there'll be a 700, really superstar people in there adding tons of value as well.
Yeah, I think that's part of the key of the success, which I think we'll talk a little bit about, is like who goes into the community and how to continue to nurture them, because it's 2024. Community seems to be like the next hot thing. And how do you make sure that people will want to spend time in your community versus the 5, 10, 15 other communities out there?
Yeah, exactly. And there, I think you've done really well identifying quite a specific niche as well, which is always a good place to start. But I guess my initial general question is, what does it take to start a great community in your opinion?
I think I had an unfair advantage of being someone who is my own target market. I guess is that the right way I would describe it? I am my own target market, right? I want more of people like me. And I mean that in a sense of I am a practitioner working in B2B marketing, and I know what I need as a member, right? And I think that's sort of been the guiding light in scaling and growing Generate. For example, like if we talk about the people who are in Generate, we optimize for in-house B2B marketers in Australia and New Zealand. If you are an SDR based out of the US selling martech, sorry, not sorry, but you're not allowed it, because we know that you have different motivations, right? You probably want to learn more about the market, but with a view to sell your product. Meanwhile, the people in there are there to learn from other marketers, network from other marketers, and generally grow in their journey as being a professional. And I think because I'm in there and I'm like, okay, well, I don't want people selling to me, so that's what I'm going to curate and drive the community towards. And I think it's grown slowly, but also much more, I don't know what the word is, efficiently, effectively, in a way that it's been a great community of a lot of engagement.
Yeah, nice. And it is really important to think about who you're letting in. Obviously, communities add a lot of value to potential vendors as well. How have you sort of found the balance of going through and making sure that who you're letting into the community is high quality? Obviously, there's a manual element to that to some extent as well.
Oh, it is 100% manual right now. Like I effectively vet with some of the ambassadors that we call in the community who help me out. It's not just me in the community, but we effectively manually vet these people who join us. They have to be working in-house, they have to be a marketer and be based in Australia and New Zealand. And if you fit those boxes, we'd love to have you in there. But then we would run a process where like, okay, well, if you're sort of like not the right persona, such as, like I said, an SDR and a US-based martech, sorry, but we'll reject you. But then we're trying to grow in a sustainable way. I mentioned to someone yesterday that we don't have an unlimited TAM. It's not as if this group will be a group of like 50,000 people, right? But it's kind of a nice niche place to be, and like for you to like feel free to ask any questions and grow in your career.
Yeah, No, and that makes sense. It's not necessarily an infinitely scalable SaaS solution, right? It's a people-driven platform designed to add value. On that note, what does success look like for Generate in your mind?
Oh, that's a solid question. Honestly, I don't know what the 5-year, 10-year plan looks like. I've been taking the approach of like, hey, this is fun to do, and I'm going to see where this takes us. One thing that we tested out earlier this year was, hey, this is a free community right now, but then myself and a few other of our ambassadors, including my partner, Kayla Medica, who's in it, it's like, we're putting a lot of time, but we're not getting anything out of it. It's free. We're not getting any money out of it. And how do we test this out? So late last year, I remember asking the community, hey, if I made this paid, would you pay? And I remember asking like over 50, probably close to 100 marketers, wildly different answers. Some people will be happy to pay because they see the value. Some people say they'll pay for the first month and then until you see if they want to continue it. Some people were outright no. They're like, no, I don't get any value out of this. I'm not going to pay. And I remember talking to a few people and they said, why don't you consider monetizing the other way where you keep this accessible and inclusive for marketers, but there are people who want access to this audience in terms of sponsorships and partnerships. And I said, maybe we'll test that out. And I think that's the change we've made this year, and we're on a bit of a learning journey. So we've worked with your team, Ryan, around like partnerships and hopefully like finding the right level of partners to give that value while continuing to foster the engagement within the community.
Yeah, no, that makes heaps of sense. And I think definitely finding out a way to add value to the community while generating revenue is a great angle to take for sure. Generate has been really successful. We've scaled to 700 people over the past couple of years. What sort of, as a B2B marketer, what sort of growth tactics have you been leveraging in order to do that?
Oh, Ryan, I wish that I could employ Alice Digital to like run my PPC campaigns. Sadly, I don't think there's enough intent, nor do I have the budget. But for this one, there's probably like 2 or 3 things that's really worked. The first one is like word of mouth. Right? It's one of those not so scalable things, but it has a few benefits. So word of mouth automatically filters out and triages the best candidates. If you are a head of marketing at a Series A and you know someone else at a Series A, you want to be seen as like the space, and you invite them to the community. And it's a benefit for Generate because we got more of similarly like people in there. So the word of mouth thing is probably like our strongest lead source, so to speak, where a lot of people just refer them into the community is number one. The second one is LinkedIn. This is probably more prominent recently in the past year, where we've been encouraging our members to start like sharing some of the stuff on Generate. We'll talk about our summit conference happening. So that's been a bit of a growth flywheel of like people seeing this and they're getting curious, getting a bit of FOMO and joining the community. That's sort of been amazing. But the LinkedIn stuff, I actually moved really slowly on it. We didn't create a Generate LinkedIn page until about a year ago. And people have been asking me for ages, like, hey, why don't we have a LinkedIn page? I can't tag Generate, but I've been sort of very thoughtful about it. I'm like, well, I don't want to create a LinkedIn page just because everyone else is creating a LinkedIn page. I want a reason that we hit enough critical mass. There's not like 3 followers, but there's people following and everything. So that's the second one, word of mouth LinkedIn. The third one is very much outbound. So in the early days, like there was like 10 people in there, and I'd see some people going, hey, would you be interested in joining this community? Some people would say yes, and the early members know who they are. But most people would go, what is this rubbish 10-person community? I'm not going to join this. But that slowly, because of like what I do in terms of like a personalized outreach and like, hey, there's this community, I think it'll add value. And if you think of a funnel, a percentage of that join, and then they can become that flywheel of that, hey, they pass on their word of mouth to their networks, or they post on LinkedIn about it because they really enjoy it, and then it's grown to the point that it is. So yes, outbound still works in a thoughtful way.
Yeah, and how did you say you were running the outbound campaigns? Was that via LinkedIn as well?
Very much. I wouldn't say it's a campaign. I think it's very much that I'd see people who fit the persona, such as if you're a senior marketer at a particular SaaS company, or if you're a paid specialist at like a larger like organization. I go, oh, you'd be perfect with interact on LinkedIn and I'd send them a connect request or a DM and be like, hey, I think you'd be perfect for this. Would you like to join? And like I said, a lot of people didn't reply because an unknown person selling something, it feels, even though I wasn't asking for their money, I got no replies. But what's great is like there's this full circle moment that in the past few months, the people who I reached out and never replied actually applied to join the community through our website. And I was like, we're hitting that sort of like threshold where like people know more about us, that they're coming in inbound, which is a great feeling.
Yeah, that's certainly a really good sign, and also satisfying, right? When you do inbound and then I've been in a similar situation, someone doesn't reply, that's fine. People get a lot of messages, but it always feels good 6 months later when they're in touch with you and you're like, yeah, that's awesome. So no, that's really great. And I think one of the things that I've read about starting a community is that early on, you need to personally engage with that community a lot in a very regular way in order to sort of stimulate the level of engagement and value as people join. Is that still something you're finding you have to do, or is it like a living organism now where it's just got a life of its own? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So your question is around like how to maintain the engagement and whether I still need to be a part of it. Yeah. So to drive engagement and generate, I still need to be a part of it. Like there is some sort of like self-fulfilling prophecy where like people are joining it who want to be in the community and they answer and ask a lot of questions, which is great. But I think this is very much like a small community, personality driven. I still need to be in there. The great thing is like I don't have to reply to everything in it. Like people would reply with some thoughts, with some questions, with some answers most of the time, but I still try to make some time a few times during the day to like check it out and then reply to some questions and like try to drive engagement. So I still need to be in there.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And coming back to LinkedIn, so when you talk about doing a lot of LinkedIn, is that mainly like organic social posting? And then what have you learned along the way about getting reach on LinkedIn?
Specifically around generate? Yeah, so I posted for the first time, I think, about generate on LinkedIn in our 1 year anniversary, effectively. And I think that's when we hit about 100 people, I think. What I found is like LinkedIn's a great channel for growth, especially the organic side. If you have the right audience and if your audience engages with your posts, that will amplify to their network. So that network effect is real. Like even today, I think we've had 2 or 3 people sign up to generate, and we always make sure, like all good marketing teams, we ask a question of like, how did you hear about us? A big chunk comes from LinkedIn around like what we do in the community. More recently, we have a flagship event coming up. So there's a lot of chatter about that and people getting FOMO. There's definitely growth on LinkedIn if you do it right. And I think that doing it right was all this part of this ecosystem of like, hey, people are finding value from Generate. So they're happy to engage, like, and comment the posts about Generate. And we just like are super upfront in the community, and you're like, hey, we want to grow, or we need to promote some ticket sales for our event. Can we get some people to help like and comment? And they do that because they see value in the community, which I'm truly grateful for.
Yeah, it's probably really helpful on LinkedIn as well. You almost have this, like army where you can send them posts in the community in order to like it and share it within their own networks, which no doubt has like a massive impact on the reach that you get.
100%, but I think it works 2 ways, right? Where I think, Ryan, like we're both like trying to be active on LinkedIn. You can't just post stuff, leave it be, and post the next day and leave it be. Like I think what founders and CEOs could be doing better is like they do that, but they still need to interact, because it's not just about the posting stuff. The more you comment, the more you engage with others, they will see the effort that you put in. So when you do have that call for help, they will happily return the favor.
Yeah, no, that's a really great point, actually. And so in terms of the Generate community where you're at right now, what has sort of surprised you about the journey? Did you think it would grow this big, or is this something that you never thought it would turn into 700 members?
I definitely didn't think it'll hit 700, but I think one of my goals this year was to work on cool things with cool people, and I'm still in that. This is still cool. This is still fun Did not think it'll hit 700, but I do think it'll hit some version of a threshold where the vibes of the community will change. I don't know what that threshold is yet. We're going to keep testing that out. But you can imagine if you were in a community of 50 people that you're feeling happy to ask questions and be active, but then it becomes a community of, say, 5,000 people. You're like, it suddenly becomes a bit too big. I don't know anyone in there. So I think it'll change, and we'll have to change with it. So we'll cross that bridge when we cross that bridge. But to answer your question, the one thing that has really surprised me since launching Generate is two things. Number one is how much there is a need of people to find their community, lowercase c, and finding their people is number one. And number two is how open people are to help for a cause that they're not getting paid for. They're happy to help. So the first one around finding their people and community is, it turns out that especially post-COVID, people just want to interact with other people in their profession. They want to ask these questions, they want to learn from others. I think there's been a fatigue of like the large companies selling to them, advertising to them. It's like, well, I just want to hear a trusted voice. If I am considering between two pieces of software, I trust people who are in the same seat as me, who are fellow marketers, and I will listen to them as opposed to whatever ad gets thrown out at them or whatever like webinar that they see. That's sort of like really awesome because it increases the engagement that they have in the community, but also just like wanting to do more in the community, which lends to my second point of like the number of people who in the community have said, hey, if you need help, I'm willing to put in some time and effort with my expertise, whether that's copywriting, email marketing, design. I'm not a designer, so all the stuff in Generate is designed by someone. Shout out to Kayla Medica, who's like a huge ambassador in the Generate community. But they're just willing to help for no payment because they know that, hey, this is becoming something and they get value out of it. And they know that I'm not getting paid, right? And it's kind of like, it's just this thing that we're trying to all grow together.
Yeah, I love that. And finding your community is so important, I think, as you touched on in COVID, things are increasingly remote, and being able to network with not just your colleagues, but with the right people that are doing what you're doing is so valuable. Building a community has been around for quite a while, and certainly it seems like it's picking up quite significantly now. My observation is that it seems like there was a real trend a few years ago of you should build a community for your business, and whether that's like, the Dropbox you're working at or a small startup, there seems to be quite a big push or view that building your own community is really good for your business. What, aside from talking about marketing communities, which we can talk about in a second, do you think that's worthwhile for a startup to build a community of their own?
I'll give the SEO answer around whether a company should build their own community. The answer is it depends. It depends on how much of a focus that is for your type of business or product. It depends on how much bandwidth you can commit to the community building. I generally think that there is more benefits for a startup to lean into existing communities for their space rather than start something in a cold start fashion. If you're working, say, for example, in the construction industry or in the edtech industry, let's use edtech for an example. If you're marketing to teachers and like school administrators, you could start your own community. But I would bet you there are existing Facebook groups for teachers and school administrators that you can lean into and sponsor. So instead of putting in the time and effort of your team to build something in a cold start fashion, start finding the genuine spaces that people congregate. Maybe it's called community. Maybe it's called something different. Maybe it's a Facebook group, right? Maybe it's a WhatsApp group. Find that and find opportunities to partner up in an authentic way, whether that's you sponsor like an event, whether that's a drinks event or whether that's like a day out event kind of thing, or whether it's a webinar. The way that you sponsor that, the audience is already there. You don't have to create the community, but you could spend exactly the same or probably less effort and money to still reach the audience. Is your goal to reach the audience, or is your goal to truly build a community? That's a sort of it depends question, I'd say. So our TLDR for most startups with like limited bandwidth and time, look for existing communities and like work authentically with them to reach them.
Yeah, interesting. And I think as well, there needs to be a real problem to solve. Like you talked about sort of the genesis of the Generate community being you trying to get sort of referrals and and help in your local region, but not being able to do that, or finding agencies that are local to you and that type of thing. Surprisingly, well, not surprisingly, but almost poetically, now your community is able to solve that problem for so many people like yourself back then. But I think that when you go and build a community for a startup, it needs to start with a real problem like that, as opposed to we should have a community and therefore we'll just build one, which leads me to my next question about the communities that exist already. It seems to me like the majority of communities sort of exist across Facebook groups, like LinkedIn groups, Slack and Discord. What is your sort of view in the future trends of communities, whether that just be in marketing or other areas as well?
Yeah, I think professionals these days, in terms of what they do, they yearn that need to be with other fellow professionals, right? Whether that's marketers being with other marketers, or if I think like with a teacher example, like you want to have a community with like other fellow teachers, it kind of makes the channel secondary. If it's successful, people will make time for that channel. So I know some companies are thinking about building communities, but they're sort of taking a lot of time to figure out, oh, should it be, like you said, in a Facebook group? Should it be in a LinkedIn group? Should it be on Discord? Should it be on Slack? It kind of doesn't really matter. Like, yeah, it matters a little bit. Try to find places that has the least amount of friction for your audience, but they will find their ways to be in that community if it adds value. Looking back at Generate, we made a decision to go with Slack because generally, like startup and earlier stage companies are on Slack for their communications with work anyway. So it's a simple transition to have like another workspace in their Slack. But we also had people in the community who are using Slack for the first time. One of our ambassadors is a true Microsoft believer and like uses Teams for work. And she keeps complaining how she has to have Slack only because of Generate. Yet she keeps coming back because we keep delivering the value. So I think that's the real thing. It's like the channel, the platform doesn't really matter. It's about whether you add value, and you add value, people will show up.
Yeah, and interesting. I think it's so interesting how communities are growing. I think, how do you think that the available sort of information on the internet through AI and the way that we might engage with that, do you think that will affect the community in any way? And maybe that means people use it more, or whatever it may be. But what's your sort of take on how the AI landscape, particularly LLMs, is going to impact communities?
Yeah, I think there's a way that LLMs could help, and AI specifically could help like make the community more sticky. Like if you think about ways that, hey, we deliver value, like a lot of the discussions in the community right now are scattered across different channels and across different discussions. There's a way to use AI to bundle that up into a bit of a roundup or like a hub of information in a way that doesn't use our time. So one thing that specifically is for us is people ask for recommendations all the time. Like if I use an example, like we are B2B marketers, a lot of it in the IT enterprise space. So a lot of our members run roundtable dinners, right? A question we get like once in a while, continually without fail, is like, hey, I'm trying to host like a 12-person dinner in Sydney and Melbourne. Do you have any recommendation for private dinner venues? Private dining venues, sorry. And then like people would like, it's like, oh, this restaurant or that restaurant, right? And then we could use AI to like amalgamate that in a way that, okay, we'll put this into a content hub so that every time someone asks that question, there's already a repository of information. And I think that's one way to use AI. But I think more broadly, people join communities for the other people aspect of it. Like very much so, like they join because their colleagues were there, or their friends are there, or someone they follow is in there. Like that AI is not going to change that. That personality-led stuff is very much the reason why they're in the community. So I think people will still win at the end of the day.
Yeah. I almost think that the two things are going to coexist quite nicely, because on the AI side, you've got like AI search is growing, and the use of ChatGPT over like Google search to go and find things, where are the best places to eat and all of that type of thing, or whatever it is you're looking for, a digital agency or swag. On the flip side, nothing is ever as valuable as personal recommendations. And I think the two things will always coexist. And so if anything, I feel that the rise of communities and small social groups where people can get more anecdotal experience, as opposed to just clear answers from the likes of ChatGPT or something like that can have like a really nice sort of synergy together. I don't know if you've seen the stats, but Reddit, for example, search has grown enormously over the past couple of years, where people are using the qualifier like X, Y, and Z plus Reddit in a Google search because they want an anecdotal experience. It's not just as simple as, give me a running plan, which you could easily get on how to train for a marathon or something. And ChatGPT, that might be super useful. But at the same time, you also want to know from people, what was it like training for your marathon? And I think right now there's a real gap that's going to exist for quite a while, where LLMs and AI aren't going to be able to provide that, and the two will coexist actually in a really nice way, and I think they'll work together really nicely. So yeah, I love the repository idea. I think there's a lot to be said about combining the two.
And also, I think your point around like top of the funnel, like the AI overview and how Google like pulls it all into like the results, there's still a place for that, right? If I look for like the best insert whatever software, you still want Google to answer that. But people just want recommendations for someone similar to them in their position. If you're a head of marketing for Series A ed tech, a strong recommendation from a fellow head of marketing Series A ed tech around what softwares they use in terms of their stack, or what sort of like agency that they use that fits their stage of the company and their problem, will be much more relevant than asking Google, hey, what is the best swag agency in Sydney, right? And then they're like, oh, yeah, these people know what they're talking about. They know how to serve my audience and my need. And I think that's why like there's always been a need for that community and people aspect of it.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And it's been great to chat to you today. I'm keen to just finish up on something exciting, your summit event that's coming up in November, I believe. Do you want to just finish up, Axel, by telling us a little bit about that and maybe how to sign up for those of us who qualify?
Yeah. So similar to how Generate is fitting a bit of a need for the like Australian B2B marketing space in terms of community, we've noticed that there is a bit of a lack of in-person conferences for B2B marketers in Australia. There are a few that have existed over the years, but they are often not quite accessible, like ticket prices of like $3,000, $4,000. And we're like, that's a lot of money. And a lot of the content that we're hearing from our community members is a lot of the contents are like repeat content that isn't as actionable, isn't as relatable. So Kayla and I decided that, hey, why don't we think about running our own event on that space, like something bigger than a simple webinar that we do run in the community, but something bigger, and we'll aim for the skies kind of. So like one of our community members, Lara, mentioned like, hey, what we can start this, and what we're launching is a conference for 150 people on November 21st this year called Generate Summit. That's a B2B marketing conference where we have a more accessible price point, and we have speakers that are from the community with our tagline of like, it's an event by B2B marketers for B2B marketers. We have speakers who are in the trenches doing the stuff, less so pie in the sky, thought leadership, and never do the work. We want the doers. We want to hear like how they're running experiments, how they're approaching product marketing, and we get to hear from them in a one-day event. So November 21st, it's in Sydney, called Generate Summit for B2B marketers. We have a little bit of like a number of, I can't remember how many tickets left, but not a lot. But come join if you're fitting the bill, and we'd love to see you there.
Sounds awesome. Get in quick, people. I'm sure it's gonna sell out and be full of heaps of practical advice. So thanks, Axel, for your time. It's been great chatting to you.
No, thanks, Ryan. It's been great.